Introduction. Hello everyone, and welcome. Today, we're diving into a crucial chapter of Japanese history, the diplomatic mission to the West during the twilight years of the samurai era. We'll be focusing on the voyage of the Kanrin Maru, a journey that played a pivotal role in shaping modern Japan. In the mid-19th century, Japan was undergoing a period of intense change. After centuries of isolation under the Tokugawa shogunate, the country was gradually opening its doors to the world. This process was both challenging and transformative. One of the most significant events of this era was the voyage of the Kanrin Maru to the United States in 1860. This mission was part of Japan's broader efforts to engage with the Western world and learn from its technologies and systems. The Kanrin Maru's journey symbolized Japan's determination to modernize its navy and establish equal diplomatic relations with Western powers. Let's explore this historic voyage through the memoirs of Fukuzawa Yukichi, one of the crew members aboard the Kanrin Maru. This is what the Kanrin Maru looked like. As you can see, it was a small warship equipped with both sails and a steam engine. It was on this vessel that the Japanese crew embarked on their great adventure across the Pacific. About Fukuzawa Yukichi. Fukuzawa Yukichi was a pioneering figure in 19th century Japan, known for his profound influence on modern Japanese society. Born in 1835, he was a key intellectual, educator, and translator who played a crucial role in Japan's transformation from a feudal society to a modern nation. Fukuzawa is best known for founding Keio University, one of Japan's most prestigious institutions of higher education. Fukuzawa's writings and translations introduced Western ideas and technology to Japan. His most famous work, An Encouragement of Learning, emphasized the importance of education and self-improvement, advocating for the adoption of Western knowledge to strengthen Japan. He believed in the power of education to uplift individuals and society as a whole, making him a significant advocate for modernization and enlightenment in Japan. Fukuzawa's legacy extends beyond education. He also promoted ideas of democracy, independence, and individual rights. His vision and efforts helped lay the foundation for Japan's rapid modernization during the Meiji era. Today, Fukuzawa Yukichi is celebrated as a symbol of progress and enlightenment, and his image is even featured on the Japanese 10,000 yen banknote. The Kanrin Maru. In the winter of 1859, a year after I arrived in Edo, the Tokugawa government made an unprecedented decision to send a warship to America. This was something that had never happened before in Japan's history. The warship was actually quite small, with only a 100-horsepower steam engine. We called it a helper machine, because we only used the steam to enter and leave ports. During the voyage, we had to rely solely on wind power. The ship, named Kanrin Maru, had been bought from the Netherlands a couple of years earlier for 25,000 gold coins. Prior to this, around 1855, some men from the shogunate had gone to Nagasaki to learn navigation from the Dutch, and their skills had gradually improved. So when the envoys were to go to Washington, it was decided that a Japanese warship would also sail to San Francisco. For our viewers, it might be hard to grasp how small a 100-horsepower steam engine is. When you consider that modern large ships have engines with tens of thousands of horsepower, you can understand how small the Kanrin Maru really was. Also, 25,000 gold coins would be equivalent to several hundred million yen in today's currency. This shows how much Japan was investing in acquiring Western technology at that time. The crew.
The captain was Chimura Setsuno Kami, the naval commissioner at the time. The second in command was Katsurin Taro, and the officers included Sasakura Chiritaro, Hamaguchi Ochiemo, and Suzu Fuji Yujiro. The surveyors were Ono Tomogoro, Bon Tetsutaro, and Matsuoka Bonchichi. The engineers were Hida Hamagoro and Yamamoto Chinjiro. The administrators were Yoshioka Yuhei and Kona ga Igo Hachiro. The interpreter was Nakahama Manjiro. The young officers included Nezuchin Jiro, Akamatsu Daizaburo, Okada Seizo, and Kosuji Masa no Shin. There were also 2 doctors, 65 sailors and firemen, and including the captain's attendants, there were 96 people in total. It was quite a crowd for such a small ship, and there are many stories to tell about this voyage. This voyage of the Kanrin Maru was the first great undertaking of its kind in Japan's history. The officers were all prepared to handle everything by themselves, being all Japanese.
Among the people mentioned here are some who would go on to play significant roles in Japan's modernization. For example, Katsurin Tato, later known as Katsu Kaishu, became an important politician from the end of the Edo period through the Meiji era. Nakahama Manjiro, famous as John Manjiro, used his experience of being educated in America to contribute to Japan's modernization. American crew members.
However, at that time, an American captain named Brooke, who had been shipwrecked off the coast of Oshima in Satsuma while surveying the Pacific Ocean floor on a small sailing ship called the Fenimore Cooper, had been rescued and was staying in Yokohama under the protection of the Tokugawa government. The captain, along with 1 officer, 1 doctor, and 4 or 5 sailors, had been staying there for a while. When they heard that a Japanese warship was sailing to San Francisco, they asked to join, thinking it would be a convenient way to return home. When this was about to be decided, the Japanese crew objected, saying they didn't want to sail with Americans. They argued that if they took these people back, it would look as if the Americans were taking them to America, which would be a matter of Japanese honor, so they stubbornly refused to let them board. The government was quite troubled by this, but in the end, they forced the issue and made the crew accept the Americans. It seems that even the government elders were not entirely confident in the skills of the Japanese officers and thought that having even 1 American sailor on board might be useful in case of emergency.
This incident well illustrates the complex feelings of the Japanese at that time. There was a desire to learn Western technology, but also a resistance to relying on foreigners. The fact that the shogunate ultimately allowed the Americans to board shows that they recognized that Japan's navigation skills were still developing. Chimuta Setsu no Kami and Fukuzawa Yukichi.
Captain Chimura Setsu no Kami, being the naval commissioner, was a high-ranking official in the Navy and would certainly bring attendance befitting his status. As for me, I really wanted to go to America on that ship, but I didn't know Chimura at all. I had only come from Osaka the previous year, so I had no connections with such shogunate officials. However, fortunately, there was a Dutch studies doctor in Edo named Katsurawa who worked for the shogunate. His family was so renowned in the field of Dutch medicine that you could call it the headquarters of Dutch medical studies in Japan. There wasn't a single person in the Dutch studies community across Japan who didn't know the name Katsurawa. So whenever I came to Edo, I would visit Katsurawa's house, and I had been there many times. As it happened, Katsurawa's family and Chimura's family were relatives, very close relatives, in fact. So I asked Katsurawa if he could introduce me to Chimura, as I wanted to accompany him to America. Katsurawa gave me a letter of introduction, and I went to Chimura's house to make my request. To my surprise, Chimura immediately agreed and said he would take me along. You see, at that time, the idea of traveling abroad was seen as an unprecedented adventure, or rather, a life-threatening endeavor. While Chimura, being the naval commissioner, had attendants, even they weren't very keen on going. So when someone like me volunteered to go, they probably thought I was a bit odd, but also fortunate to have such a willing volunteer. I was immediately accepted as part of Chimura's entourage.
Fukuzawa's actions here demonstrate his curiosity and progressive spirit. At that time, overseas travel was considered very dangerous, and many people avoided it. However, Fukuzawa actively sought this opportunity. This attitude would later make Fukuzawa an important promoter of Japan's modernization. Drinking sake in Utaga.
The Kanrin Maru set sail in January 1860, first departing from Shinagawa and heading to Uraga. At the same time, envoys from Japan were also setting out for America, and a ship called the Powhatan had come from America to escort them. The Powhatan was to come later, so the Kanrin Maru sailed first and anchored at Uraga. Something interesting happened in Uraga. The crew, all young men, decided that since this might be their last chance to enjoy Japanese sake before leaving Japan, they should go ashore and have a drink. Everyone agreed, so we went ashore to what looked like a tea house and drank quite a lot. Now, I have to admit to some mischief here. As we were about to return to the ship, I noticed a rinsing bowl on a shelf in the hallway of the tea house. Thinking it might be useful on the ship, I quickly pocketed it. It was winter then, and as soon as we set sail, we encountered a great storm. Day after day of storms followed, and it was no easy task to eat properly from bowls in such conditions. But that stolen rinsing bowl proved very useful. We could put a serving of rice in it, pour soup or whatever else over it, and eat standing up. It was incredibly convenient, and I used it all the way to America and back, even keeping it at my home for a long time afterwards. Later, I heard that the place where we had eaten and drunk in Uraga was actually a brothel. I didn't know it at the time, but looking back, that large bowl must have been a courtesan's rinsing bowl. It might sound unsanitary, but during the voyage, it was incredibly useful, our one and only treasure, which is quite amusing when you think about it.
This anecdote vividly depicts the sensibilities of the Japanese at that time and the difficulties they faced. It also well illustrates Fukuzawa's quick thinking and his positive attitude in dealing with difficult situations. The mention of the brothel and the rinsing bowl provides interesting insights into the social conditions and cultural background of the time. Silver coins scattered.
After leaving Uraga, we sailed northward. The Kanrin Maru, being only a 100 horsepower ship, couldn't constantly burn coal during the voyage. We only used steam when entering or leaving port. Once out at sea, it was purely a sailing ship. We couldn't carry enough coal, so we had to rely on sails. Sailing across the Pacific Ocean like this, we encountered fierce storms almost every day. We had 4 small boats with us, but the violent waves took 2 of them. At that time, I was serving as the captain's attendant, constantly running errands for him. The captain's quarters were at the stern of the ship. One morning, as I went to his room to perform my usual duties, I found dollars scattered all over the floor, hundreds, maybe thousands of them. Apparently, during the previous night's storm, the bags of dollars that had been stored in a closet had burst open, scattering the coins everywhere. The lock must have come undone due to the violent rocking of the ship. Realizing the gravity of the situation, I immediately went back to inform Yoshioka Yuhei, who was in charge of official matters and was at the bow of the ship. He was also greatly surprised. We both rushed to the scene and, with my help, gathered up all the dollars, put them back in bags, and returned them to the closet. The reason for this incident was that at that time, we had no concept of foreign exchange. The simple thought was, if you travel, you need money. If you need money, you take it with you. So they had packed who knows how many thousands of dollars in bags and stored them in the captain's room. It's a strange tale of how this money overflowed due to the storm. This gives you an idea of the situation 40 years ago. Nowadays, it's not an issue at all. You could just wire the money over, and there's no need to carry cash on the ship. But the old samurai, with no business sense, typically did things this way. Throughout the voyage, we faced storms every day, with waves constantly washing over the deck. I still remember that when we were below deck, there were square windows above us. When the ship tilted, we could see the towering waves of the ocean through these windows. The waves were enormous, and the ship would tilt 37 or 38 degrees regularly. They say a ship will sink if it tilts 45 degrees, but fortunately, we avoided any major disasters and continued on our course. During our journey, we didn't see much except once when we encountered a sailing ship. It was an American ship carrying Chinese passengers. Other than that, we saw nothing.
This anecdote vividly illustrates the underdeveloped state of Japan's financial system at the time and the difficulties of overseas travel. The risk of carrying large amounts of cash and the lack of an exchange system show how unfamiliar Japan was with international transactions. The description of the ship tilting 37 or 38 degrees vividly portrays the limitations of navigation technology at the time and the dangers faced by the crew. Like being in a jail during a great earthquake.
After 37 days at sea, we finally arrived in San Francisco. Throughout the voyage, I seemed to have a strong constitution and never felt afraid. I often joked with my shipmates, saying, "This is nothing. I've never experienced it before, but it must be like being in jail during a great earthquake every day and night." I laughed about it, never once thinking the ship might sink. I guess my faith in Western technology was so deeply ingrained that I didn't feel any fear at all. Along the way, we started to run low on water, and there was talk of whether we should stop in Hawaii or not. We could probably make it to San Francisco without stopping if we endured, but to be on the safe side, some suggested we should stop and replenish our water supply. In the end, we decided to sail directly to San Francisco without stopping in Hawaii. From then on, we had to strictly ration our water. We were only allowed to use water for drinking and nothing else. There was an incident during this time that greatly impressed everyone. We had 4 or 5 American sailors on board, and they kept using water despite the rationing. When we complained to Captain Brooke about this, he said, "If they use water, shoot them dead immediately. They're a common enemy, so there's no need for explanations or questions. Just execute them on the spot." Logically speaking, he had a point. So we called the sailors and told them they'd be shot if they used water. Thanks to this strict water conservation, we somehow managed not to run out of water, and all 96 of us arrived safely in America. The conditions on the ship were quite chaotic. The sailors all wore tight-sleeved clothes, but their footwear was straw sandals. It seems they had stockpiled hundreds or thousands of pairs of these sandals. The ship was constantly wet, and we only had 4 or 5 days of clear weather during the entire 37-day journey. It was truly a mess on board. After arriving in San Francisco, the captain splurged and bought each sailor a pair of boots, which greatly improved their appearance.
This part vividly describes how challenging the Kanrin Maru's voyage was. The water shortage crisis and the tension with the American sailors demonstrate the difficulties of intercultural communication. Fukuzawa Yukichi's joking attitude reflects his optimistic personality and his way of dealing with unfamiliar situations. The chaotic conditions on the ship and the change from straw sandals to boots symbolically show the contrast between traditional Japanese lifestyle and Western culture. The boldness of the Japanese people.
However, there's something about this voyage that we can be very proud of as Japanese. The first time Japanese people even saw a steamship was in 1853. We only started learning navigation in 1855, when we received training from the Dutch in Nagasaki. It was in the winter of 1859 that we decided to sail a ship abroad, just 7 years after first seeing a steamship and 5 years after beginning to learn navigation. The fact that we set out in January 1860 without relying on anyone else's help, the courage and skill this took, is something Japan can be proud of on the world stage. As I mentioned before, during the voyage, we didn't rely on any help from Captain Brooke. We did our own measurements and calculations. The Americans did theirs too. We would compare our results afterwards, but we never once asked the Americans for help. That's something to be really proud of. When I look around at Korea, China, and the rest of East Asia today, I don't see anyone else who could learn navigation for just 5 years and then cross the Pacific. It's not just them. Even Peter the Great of Russia, who famously went to the Netherlands to learn shipbuilding, probably couldn't have pulled this off. Even if he was an extraordinary person, I doubt there were many people in Russia at that time who were as bold and intellectually curious as the Japanese.
Here, Fukuzawa highly praises the Japanese people's ability to learn and adapt. Crossing the Pacific after just a few years of learning is indeed a remarkable achievement. This confident attitude reflects the spirit that would drive Japan's rapid modernization during the Meiji Restoration. The comparison with other Asian countries and even Russia emphasizes the unique progressive spirit that the Japanese possessed at that time. Americans' welcoming salute.
We arrived safely in San Francisco Harbor. As soon as we docked, prominent local citizens came to the ship to express their congratulations. This was the beginning of their welcome, and onshore, spectators gathered in droves. Next, they decided to fire a salute from land, which meant we had to return the salute from the Kanrin Maru. There's an interesting story about this. Kanrin Maru, who was second in command to Captain Shimura, was terribly seasick. Throughout the voyage, he had been like an invalid, unable to leave his room. But upon arriving at the port, as the second in command, he had to oversee everything, including this salute business. Katsu argued that it was impossible for us to return the salute, saying it would be better not to attempt it and risk messing up. However, one of the officers, Sasakurachi Taro, insisted, "No, we can do it. I'll show you." Katsu scoffed, "Don't be ridiculous. If you can pull it off, I'll give you my head." Sasakura was more determined than ever. He instructed the sailors to clean the cannon and prepare the gunpowder. Using an hourglass to time it perfectly, they managed to return the salute beautifully. Sasakura was triumphant. "We did it perfectly, so your head is mine now, Katsu," he boasted. "But since we'll need you during the voyage, I'll let you keep it for now." This incident brought much laughter to the ship. In any case, we managed to return the salute splendidly. Once we had safely arrived in port, the welcome we received from the Americans was truly overwhelming. They couldn't have done more for us. From their perspective, these were the Japanese whose country they had opened up just 8 years ago with Commodore Perry's expedition, and now they were sailing to America on their own. It must have felt like seeing their students graduate and enter the real world. They must have been thinking, "We started this." They spared no effort in making us comfortable. As soon as we landed in San Francisco, carriages came to pick us up and take us to hotels in the city for rest. I'm not sure if they were city officials or what, but important people from all over town came in droves to greet us. There were all sorts of receptions and banquets. Then, near San Francisco at a place called Mare Island, they lent us official naval residences as lodgings for our group from the Kanrin Maru. Since our ship had sustained quite a bit of damage during the voyage, they even put it in dry dock for repairs. During our stay, they were of course prepared to provide all our meals and everything else, but the sailors and other Japanese weren't used to Western food. We insisted that we needed Japanese rice to eat. The Americans, knowing that Japanese people like fish, brought us fresh fish every day. They even set up baths for us every day, knowing how much we enjoy bathing. Since Mare Island wasn't a town, they would occasionally invite us to come to San Francisco. We'd go by boat, and they would take us to hotels and entertain us. This happened quite often.
This part vividly depicts the early stages of cultural exchange between Japan and the United States. The anecdote about the salute demonstrates the capabilities and determination of the Japanese crew, as well as the light-hearted humor among them. The warm welcome from the Americans reflects the pride and expectations they felt about Japan's opening and modernization. At the same time, the consideration for differences in food and bathing customs shows the early stages of cross-cultural understanding. These experiences played an important role in Japan's later modernization, helping them understand and adapt to Western culture. Surprised by the carpets.
However, everything was unfamiliar to us. For example, when we first saw horse-drawn carriages, we were truly amazed. You'd think we could have figured out that it was a vehicle if we saw a carriage with horses attached, but at first glance, we couldn't quite make sense of it. When the door opened and we got in, the horses started moving. Only then did we realize, oh, I see, this is a carriage pulled by horses. All of us Japanese were wearing our swords and straw sandals. When we were led into the hotels, we were astonished to see carpets covering the floors. These carpets were something that, in Japan, only the most extravagant people would buy small pieces of for things like wallets or tobacco pouches, paying a high price for just a few square inches. But here, they had rooms 8 or 10 tatami mats in size completely covered with this material, and people were walking on it with their shoes. It was absolutely mind-boggling to us. But since the Americans were casually walking in with the shoes they'd worn on the street, we too stepped onto the carpets with our straw sandals. As soon as we entered, drinks were served. When they opened the bottles, there was a terrifying noise. It was champagne, which was very strange to us. We couldn't understand what was floating in our glasses. The idea of having ice in early spring was unthinkable to us. Glasses were lined up in front of each of us, and when it came time to drink, some of the Japanese put the floating things, ice, in their mouths, panicked, and spat them out, while others chewed on them without spitting them out. Eventually, we realized it was ice in the drinks. Then, when I wanted to smoke, I noticed there was no ashtray or ash receptacle. So I lit my cigarette using the fire from the stove. There might have been matches available, but I didn't know about them, so I used the stove. But with no ashtray, I had nowhere to discard the ash. I took some paper from my pocket, tapped the ash into it, carefully folded it to make sure there was no fire left, and put it in my sleeve. A while later, when I was about to have another smoke, I noticed smoke coming from my sleeve. To my surprise, the cigarette butt I thought I had extinguished had set the paper on fire. I was quite shocked.
This anecdote vividly portrays the culture shock experienced by the Japanese when they first encountered Western culture. Horse-drawn carriages, carpets, champagne, ice, all of these were unfamiliar to the Japanese at that time. Particularly, their surprise at seeing carpets used not as luxury items but in everyday life starkly shows the differences in lifestyle between Japan and the West. The confusion over smoking also suggests how even small differences in daily habits could lead to significant misunderstandings. These experiences played an important role in Japan's later modernization process, helping them understand and adapt to Western lifestyles and culture. Even a carefree scholar feels like a bride.
Everything was like this. I've never been a bride, but I imagine this must be how a bride feels when she moves into an unfamiliar house, surrounded by strangers, being fussed over, with some people laughing and others making small talk. The bride sits quietly, trying to mind her manners and not be laughed at, but ends up feeling flustered and blushing. I could somewhat imagine that kind of discomfort. Until I left Japan, I had been a carefree scholar, walking tall and fearing no one. But coming to America for the first time, I felt as small as a bride. Even I found it funny how much I had changed. Then, the ladies and gentlemen would gather and show us what they called dancing. When we went to see it, we couldn't understand it at all. The sight of men and women flying around the room in a strange manner was just too funny, but we thought it would be rude to laugh, so we tried our best to hold it in. This too was quite a struggle at first.
This part demonstrates Fukuzawa's keen observational skills and deep self-awareness. By comparing his situation to that of a bride, he artfully expresses the cultural discomfort and anxiety he felt. His reaction to Western dancing shows how alien Western social customs were to Japanese people at that time. These experiences provided important insights that would later help in Japan's modernization process, as they learned to understand and adapt to Western culture. Surprised by the custom of respecting women and looking down on men.
Even the smallest things were handled in the way I've described, and we couldn't understand any of the social customs and manners. Once, near Mare Island, there was a place called Vallejo where a Dutch doctor lived. The Dutch have always had close ties with the Japanese, so this doctor invited Captain Chimura to visit. When we went to the doctor's house, which seemed to be quite fashionable for a countryside home, we were treated to quite a feast. But what was most surprising was that the doctor's wife came out, sat in the parlor, and was actively entertaining the guests, while her husband was running around serving everyone. This was so strange to us. It was completely opposite to how things are done in Japan. In Japan, the husband would entertain the guests while the wife ran around serving. It just seemed so backwards to us. When we asked what the main dish was, it turned out to be a whole roasted suckling pig. This too shocked us. We thought, how appalling. It's as if we've wandered into the demon's lair at Ashigahara. That's how it felt to us. After being treated to this lavish meal, on our way back, they asked if we'd like to ride horses. That sounded interesting, and it had been a while, so we agreed and borrowed some horses to ride. Captain Chimura, being a Hatamoto, direct retainer, of Edo, was an excellent horseman. In Edo, he would ride horses every day. As we galloped along on these horses, the Americans were surprised, saying they didn't know Japanese people could ride horses. They looked at us with astonishment. This shows how little both sides understood about each other.
This anecdote vividly illustrates the differences in social norms and culture between Japan and America. Particularly, the difference in women's social status and roles was a big surprise for Fukuzawa and his companions. The cultural differences in food, such as the whole roasted suckling pig, and the American surprise at the Japanese's horse riding skills, show how little mutual understanding there was at the time. These experiences likely became a catalyst for reconsidering gender roles and social norms during Japan's later modernization process. Explanations of things feel like scratching an H through a boot.
Then, the Americans took us on tours of various factories. At that time, there were no railways in the San Francisco area yet. There were all sorts of industrial facilities, and they showed them to us. What was strange was that while they didn't have electric lights, they did have telegraphs. They were also using Galvani's electroplating method. The Americans thought that we Japanese couldn't even dream of such things, so they showed them to us expecting us to be amazed. But we actually knew about these things. We said, "This is a telegraph. This uses Galvani's power to do this." There was also a sugar factory where they were using large vacuum pans to speed up oiling. They explained this to us in great detail, but we already knew that creating a vacuum speeds up oiling. We also knew that sugar could be purified by filtering it through bone char. The Americans seemed to think these concepts were completely beyond our comprehension, so they kindly explained everything to us. But we had been studying these very things for years back in Japan, so none of it was particularly surprising to us. The only thing that truly surprised us was the abundance of iron. Whether we looked in trash heaps or on the beach, there was so much iron everywhere. Things that looked like oil cans and various empty food cans were discarded in large numbers. This was astonishing to us. In Edo, after a fire, people would swarm to the burnt sites to collect nails. But here in America, iron was thrown away as if it were mere garbage. I found this very strange. I was also surprised by how expensive things were. A jar of oysters cost half a dollar, approximately $15 in today's money, and it only contained about 20 or 30 oysters. In Japan, the same number of oysters would cost about 24 or 30 mon, less than $1 in today's currency. The fact that in America it cost as much as 1 bu and 2 shu, about $30 to 40 in today's money, was shocking. It seemed like an incredibly expensive place. I was amazed by this, and I realized I didn't understand much about the social, political, and economic situation here.
This part shows that Japanese knowledge of scientific technology was surprisingly advanced. The fact that they already understood technologies like the telegraph and Galvani's electroplating method is evidence of how quickly Japan was absorbing Western scientific knowledge. On the other hand, their surprise at the abundance of iron and the difference in prices highlights the differences in economic situations and resources between Japan and America. These observations likely had a significant influence on Japan's later industrial revolution and economic development. Fukuzawa's keen observational skills and analytical ability are clearly demonstrated here. Asking about Washington's descendants.
At one point, something occurred to me and I asked someone, "What has become of Washington's descendants nowadays?" The person replied, "Washington must have had some female descendants. I don't know what they're doing now, but I suppose they're married to someone or other." This very nonchalant answer surprised me. They didn't seem to care at all. This was strange to me. Of course, I knew that America was a republic and that presidents changed every 4 years, but I thought that Washington's descendants must be very important people. In my mind, I was thinking of figures like Minamoto no Yoritomo or Tokugawa Ieyasu, and I was drawing comparisons from there. So when I heard this casual answer, I was shocked. Even now, I remember how strange I found this. While I wasn't surprised by anything related to science, I was completely at a loss when it came to social matters. Once, a Captain McDowell at the naval base on Mare Island said he wanted to see Japanese currency. The captain, apparently having prepared for such requests, had a variety of old and new gold and silver coins. He sent over a collection of coins from the Kicho-era small gold coins to the most recent Monin-era coins. The Americans just said, "How interesting." but showed no sign of thinking they had received a treasure. The day after receiving the coins, the captain said, "Thank you very much," and the next morning his wife brought over some flowers. I helped with this exchange and was privately impressed. I thought, this is how humans should be. How noble-minded they are. It would be vulgar to get excited over receiving gold and silver. This is how we should aspire to be. I was greatly impressed by this.
This anecdote vividly illustrates the differences in political culture and values between Japan and America. The indifference towards Washington's descendants reflects American egalitarianism and individualism, in contrast to the feudal Japanese values that emphasized bloodlines and family lineages. The Americans' reaction to the gold and silver coins shows a culture that values courtesy and gratitude over material worth. Through these observations, Fukuzawa gained opportunities to reconsider the nature of Japanese society. These experiences likely had a significant influence on Fukuzawa's later thought formation and the transformation of values during Japan's modernization. No charge for repairing the warship.
As I mentioned earlier, the Americans took extremely good care of us. Not only did they repair our ship in their dry dock, but they even made boxes for the personal use of our crew members. When everything was ready and we were about to leave, we tried to pay for the ship repairs and other expenses, but the Americans just laughed. They acted as if the idea of payment was ridiculous. No matter how much we insisted, they wouldn't even discuss a bill.
This anecdote demonstrates the diplomatic stance and generosity of America at that time. The fact that they didn't charge for repairing the Kanrin Maru likely had more significance than mere kindness. America probably prioritized building a good relationship with Japan and gaining their trust. This experience must have deeply impressed Fukuzawa and his companions, making them recognize the importance of tolerance and friendship in international relations. This event may have influenced Japan's later diplomatic policies and approach to international relations. First English dictionary brought to Japan.
At that time, the interpreter Nakahama Manjiro and I each bought a copy of Webster's dictionary. These were probably the first Webster's dictionaries ever brought into Japan. We bought these and had nothing else left, then set sail successfully for home.
The purchase of Webster's dictionaries holds more significance than just a mere event. It was an important step in Japan's English learning and absorption of Western knowledge. The fact that Fukuzawa and Nakahama sacrificed everything else to buy these dictionaries shows how highly they valued the acquisition of English and Western knowledge. These dictionaries likely greatly contributed to English education and understanding of Western culture in Japan after their return. Especially Fukuzawa, who later founded Keio University, played an important role in spreading Western knowledge in Japan. This small action became a significant step towards Japan's modernization and internationalization. Conclusion. The voyage of the Kanrin Maru to the United States in 1860 was a significant event in Japanese history, marking the nation's earnest efforts to modernize and engage with the world. The journey was filled with challenges, from navigating rough seas to dealing with cultural differences, yet it was a testament to Japan's resilience and determination to learn from the West. The crew, including notable figures such as Chimutase Tsunokami and Katsurin Tata, played crucial roles in this mission. Their experiences not only highlighted the difficulties of such an unprecedented voyage but also showcased the boldness and adaptability of the Japanese people. The mission's success laid important groundwork for Japan's rapid transformation during the Meiji Restoration. The story of the Kanrin Maru, based on the memoirs of Fukuzawa Yukichi, offers a detailed and personal glimpse into this pivotal moment. Fukuzawa's accounts reveal both the practical and the humorous aspects of the voyage, illustrating the cultural exchanges and misunderstandings that occurred. His observations, such as the abundance of iron and the peculiar social customs in America, provide valuable insights into the perceptions and experiences of the Japanese envoys. The Kanrin Maru's journey was more than a diplomatic mission. It was an educational expedition that brought back not just technological knowledge but also cultural and social awareness. The purchase of Webster's dictionaries by Fukuzawa and Nakahama Manjuto symbolizes the beginning of a deeper intellectual engagement with the West, which would profoundly influence Japan's future. This concludes today's exploration of Japan's mission to the West. In our next episode, we'll delve deeper into the adventures and impacts of this historic voyage. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.